She was humiliated during an interview, told that people like her wouldn't fit in. The recruiter had no idea she was the owner's daughter. What happened next would shock everyone. But let's start from the beginning. Danielle Carter, a poised 22-year-old graduate, exuded determination as she entered the towering lobby of Weston Enterprises. Her sleek navy suit hugged her slender frame, while her dark brown eyes, full of resolve, surveyed the immaculate surroundings. Her natural curls framed her face like a halo, a testament to her confidence in embracing her identity. This wasn't just another job application. It was her chance to break into corporate strategy at one of the nation's leading firms, a dream she had worked tirelessly to achieve. Her resume was impeccable. Summa cum laude graduate from Princeton, internships at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey, and countless leadership roles that set her apart. Yet, as she approached the receptionist's desk, she felt the first prick of subtle disapproval. The middle-aged receptionist barely looked at her, her tight smile betraying a flicker of judgment as her eyes briefly lingered on Danielle's hair. "Take a seat," the woman said curtly, her voice clipped. Danielle chose a spot near the large glass windows, where sunlight poured in. She took a steadying breath, repeating her practiced interview answers in her mind. Her father's advice echoed in her ears. Stay calm and never let them see you falter. Minutes later, the recruiter arrived. Mark Harrington was everything Danielle expected and dreaded. His tailored gray suit and polished demeanor screamed authority, but the smirk on his face suggested something darker. His eyes swept over her with casual dismissal, lingering on her curls just a moment too long. "Danielle Carter?" he asked, his voice dripping with indifference. "Yes," Danielle replied, extending her hand. Mark ignored the gesture, turning on his heel. "Follow me," he said curtly, his tone more a command than a request. In the interview room, Mark leaned back in his chair, his piercing gaze fixed on Danielle. "Princeton, huh? Not bad for someone like you," he said, his voice laced with condescension. Danielle's confidence wavered, but she kept her composure. "Yes, and I graduated summa cum laude with internships at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey." Mark chuckled dismissively. "Impressive. But no real job experience. People like you don't last here." His smirk widened, sealing her humiliation. Danielle stumbled out of the interview room, her cheeks burning with humiliation, and her hands trembling as she clutched her portfolio. The recruiter's words echoed in her head. People like you wouldn't last here. The sting of those words was sharper than any criticism she'd ever faced. She wanted to run straight out of Weston Enterprises, leave behind the pristine lobby and the suffocating weight of rejection. But her father's voice played in her mind. Never let them see you sweat. Instead, Danielle ducked into the restroom. She locked herself in a stall, set her portfolio down, and leaned against the cool tile wall. Closing her eyes, she took slow, deep breaths, trying to steady her racing heart. "This isn't the end," she told herself, even as tears threatened to spill. When she finally felt calm enough, she pulled out her phone and called the one person who always had her back. Her father answered on the first ring. "How'd it go, Danny?" His deep, steady voice was a lifeline. "It was awful, Dad," she admitted, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "The recruiter said I wasn't good enough and that I didn't fit in, whatever that means." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for Danielle to wipe her eyes and wonder if he was still there. Finally, Malcolm Carter spoke, his tone sharp and controlled. "What's his name?" "Mark Harrington," she said, unsure where this was going. "Stay where you are. I'll handle this," her father replied before abruptly ending the call. Danielle stood frozen, staring at her phone. Handle this? What could he possibly mean? Confused and curious, she returned to the lobby, her thoughts swirling. 15 minutes later, the sleek glass doors of Weston Enterprises swung open. Malcolm Carter strode in, his tailored suit impeccable, his bald head gleaming under the lights. At 48, he carried himself with an authority that turned heads. Every employee he passed greeted him with nervous reverence. Danielle's jaw dropped as realization dawned. Her father wasn't just here to support her. He was the CEO of Weston Enterprises. Mark Harrington lounged in the break room, leaning against the counter with an air of smug superiority. He chuckled with a colleague, recounting his morning. "These rookie applicants," he said, shaking his head. "They come in thinking they can conquer the world. One today? Total joke, completely out of her league." His laughter died instantly when Malcolm Carter's commanding voice thundered from the hallway. "Mark Harrington, my office. Now." Mark's face drained of color as the room fell silent. His colleague took a step back, clearly not wanting to be associated with whatever was about to unfold. Mark straightened his tie nervously and muttered, "Excuse me," before hurrying toward the office. Malcolm's expression was a storm as he stood by the door, holding it open just long enough for Mark to enter. Danielle, standing nearby, watched through the glass walls, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father like this, every movement radiating authority and fury. "Sit," Malcolm ordered, gesturing sharply to the chair across from his desk. Mark obeyed, his hands already slick with sweat. "Do you know who you just interviewed?" Malcolm's voice was controlled but ice-cold, each word cutting like a blade. Mark stammered, his confidence crumbling. Yes. Danielle Carter, a candidate for my daughter," Malcolm snapped, his tone cracking like thunder. "The same Danielle Carter who graduated top of her class from Princeton. The same Danielle Carter whose resume outshines half the executives in this building. And the same Danielle Carter you had the audacity to insult with your outdated, prejudiced assumptions." Mark's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sweat beaded on his forehead as Malcolm leaned forward, his piercing gaze locked on the recruiter. Weston Enterprises prides itself on talent, integrity, and innovation. You clearly lack all three. "Mr. Carter, please, Mark started, desperation creeping into his voice. "Get out," Malcolm interrupted, his tone as sharp as a blade. Mark slunk out of the office, his shoulders hunched, avoiding Danielle's eyes as he passed. She stepped inside as Malcolm's expression softened. He gestured to a chair and said gently, "Let's talk, Danny." In her father's office, Danielle sat across from him, still reeling from what had just happened. "Dad, I didn't want you to fire him just because of me," she said. Malcolm leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. "Danny, this wasn't just about you. It's about the culture we foster here. If someone like Harrington is allowed to stay, how many other talented people like you would he push away?" Danielle nodded, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Dad." Malcolm smiled. "You earned your spot here, Danny. But if you don't want to work at Weston, I'll support whatever path you choose." Danielle considered it for a moment. "I want to prove myself, Dad, but I want to earn it, not just because I'm your daughter." He nodded. "Then start tomorrow. You'll work under someone who's not me. They'll be tough, but fair." As Danielle left the office that day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. Weston Enterprises was about to learn just how capable Danielle Carter truly was.